Good morning, stakeholders, and welcome to the Office of Procurement Regulations webinar on the Procurement in Action training series entitled Identifying Requirements and Developing Specifications. I'm Tamara Roy, Head of Corporate Communications, and we're extremely pleased that you're able to participate in today's session. At this time, we recognize our Chairman and Procurement Regulator, Mr. Munilal Lalchan. While he will not officiate today, he is available to take any questions that you may have at the end of the session. The team who will be presenting today are the Head of Procurement Policy Development Department, Ms. Pastora Brown, Policy Officer, Ms. Devika Singh, and Legal Policy Research Officer, Ms. Hafzah Sooknanan. Before we begin the formal aspects of today's proceedings, please allow me to go through some helpful tips for a successful session. Do note that your mics will be muted. Your questions during the session can be sent via the chat option on the Teams platform. These questions will be collated by our team and addressed in our question and answer segment at the end of the session. Please keep your contributions helpful and be considerate to our presenters and other participants. At the end of today's session, you will be invited to provide your feedback. Feel free to help us improve future sessions to better match your needs by letting us know what worked well and what did not. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared via email and uploaded to our website. Now, before we begin, just to enhance your experience, we will now show a demo on using the Teams and Slido platforms. So without further delay, I will now ask Ms. Brown to share some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roy. Good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to the Office of Procurement Regulations Procurement in Action webinar series. So at each session, we ask you for your feedback, and what we try to do is to use your feedback to improve as we go forward. So what we would have done, we would have shared with you via email today's presentation. So I hope that everyone would have received a copy of the presentation and that you were able to download it to have access to it so that you can follow along as we go through today's session. On slide number 55 of the presentation, you will see as well today's case study. So these are your tools for today, and I hope that you have them close by so that when you actually go out into your breakout rooms as well, you will have access to the information that you need. So just a very quick recap to remind us of where we are in this process, because it's been a while since we would have spoken with each other. So last month, September, we would have covered two important topics in the procurement planning process. The first one was annual procurement planning, where we would have done a quick recap of the annual procurement planning process, and you would have also done an exercise on that topic. Then we looked at the market research report and analysis, where we would have examined together the market research process. And again, you had some group work there that we hope you found beneficial. Today, we will be moving a little bit deeper into the public procurement planning process. And today, our topic is entitled Identifying Requirements and Developing Specifications. On Thursday, we will delve into procurement methods and procedures, as well as supply contracts. So if you listen very carefully, you will see how we are building towards a particular crescendo. Next month, we will journey across to evaluation methodology and contract management plan. And last but not least, we will actually be working together on developing a procurement strategy. And all of this is in the efforts of equipping you, giving you the tools, the strategies, the ideas, giving you the support that you need to plan your procurement process. And I will repeat that the planning of your procurement process, according to the Act, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015, as amended, the very first step of your procurement is not the development of your RFP document, or it is not sending out a request for quotation. It is actually planning your procurement. So before we get into today's proceedings, we just want to take an overview of the procurement planning process in order to reinforce your appreciation of this critical step of the public procurement proceedings. And when I say critical step, by now you should know what I mean. If you do not plan your procurements properly, by the time you get around to evaluating your bids, you are going to run into problems. So, step one of the planning process is identifying your procurement need. Now, your procurement need may be something as small as one fan or one desktop printer for your office, or your procurement need may be 60 or even 150 laptops for your organization. Or your procurement need may be a relatively low value consultancy service for, say, about $30,000, or your procurement need may be a high risk, high value service that will cost the organization $1.5 million of public funds. Or you may need a specialist piece of medical equipment, or you may need to procure construction or engineering services or engineering works to repair a road that suffered severe damage during the recent heavy rains. No matter how big or how small your procurement, you will need to follow certain steps to ensure transparency, accountability, fairness, integrity, and value for money, since you are spending public funds for which you are accountable to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So while the process may be the same for all procurements, the procedures will be different. Just think about it. For your own personal use, when you are spending your own personal funds, do you utilize exactly the same procedures to purchase a fan costing $500 that you would utilize if you plan to buy a vehicle or a piece of land? Would you use the same procedures to buy the fan that you would use to buy catering services for your son or your daughter's wedding? So this is what we want you to think about as we go into today's presentations and the future presentations. Once you have identified your procurement need, the next step will be to investigate the best way to go about with your procurement. So just think again about the analogy of the fan and the vehicle. This will take you into Module 2, which we covered last time, and the topic was conducting your market research. So what does your market research do for you? If you remember what we covered, your market research helps you to get information on the goods, works, or services that you need to procure. It helps you to understand how is this good, work, or service sold. by the suppliers and contractors. And once you have that information, you are better able to plan your procurements in order to achieve the outcome that you are after. So once you've conducted your market research, you complete your market research report. This is a very important document to be completed in the procurement planning process. Your market research will also help you with refining your specifications if you are procuring goods or equipment, refining your terms of reference if you are procuring services, or refining your scope of works if you are procuring construction services or construction works. The information that you capture in your market research report then feeds into your, that's correct, your procurement strategy development form. Now, you would have seen on the OPR's website that there are 2 procurement strategy development forms. One helps you with the planning of your high-risk, high-value projects, and the other one helps you with the planning of your low-risk, low-value projects. So you complete your procurement strategy development form, which we will be looking at when we come to module 6, the final module. But what goes into this form? An analysis, as well as the conclusions drawn from the market research report. So the subject matter expert or the requisitioner conducts the market research and passes the market research report along with the purchase requisition and the specifications to the procurement department. The procurement officer in charge of that particular procurement will review the market research report and will use the information in the report to develop the procurement strategy for that particular procurement. So your procurement strategy development form will have your analysis and conclusions. It will help you to identify and analyze your procurement risks, as well as to determine that is the place, not when you get to the evaluation stage, but this is the place where you will determine the most appropriate strategies to deal with your procurement as well as your contract management risks. In your procurement strategy development form, you will also outline your procurement strategy for the procurement. So the question arises, do we have to go through this procurement planning process for every single procurement that we undertake? And the answer is a very resounding yes. Those of you who have been in the business for a while now would recognize that procurement planning there was no heavy emphasis on procurement planning in years gone by. The Central Tenders Board Act did not did not address procurement planning, and it did not address contract management, just the tendering and award of contract. Similarly, other procurement models would not have addressed procurement planning. So for a number of you procurement practitioners, procurement planning is new, but procurement planning is critical to the achievement of the objects of the Act, including, among all the others, value for money. So your procurement strategy development form will help you to determine the most appropriate procurement method for your particular procurement. It will help you to develop right there your evaluation methodology, criteria, sub-criteria, and scoring system. It will help you with the selection method. What are you going to use to determine who is the winning bidder at the end of the day? It also helps you to determine or develop your contract management plan. Now, if you look very carefully at what goes into the procurement strategy development form, you will see that you will be able to then very easily lift out your procurement method, evaluation methodology, criteria, sub-criteria, and scoring system, as well as selection method, lift it out of your procurement strategy development form and place it nicely and neatly into your solicitation document. So you begin to see now how easy all of this is, and this how one step leads into the other step. Your contract management plan, or before I go to the contract management plan, your evaluation method, criteria, sub-criteria, and scoring system will, as well as your selection method, will actually assist you now with your evaluation and award of contract. And last but not least, your contract management plan will assist you in managing the contract once it has been awarded. All right, so I gave you the heart-rending news that this process has to be undertaken for each and every procurement. I will now give you the good news. And the good news is practice makes perfect. So as we enter into this new public procurement paradigm and we practice these good steps, what it does is that it helps build capacity in the procurement practitioners, the procurement professionals, and in the organization, and even in the country for good procurement practices. And the more we practice the good things, the better we will get at it. So if something takes you, let's say 1 month to do right now, before you know it, you will be taking just a couple of days to do it. All right, so I hope that these introductory remarks were helpful. Everything I have said here will come out to you once again as you listen to the presentations. So I would like to just invite you to relax, focus on the presentations, work together in your assignments. And as you listen to the presentations, please remember to think about how you would utilize different procedures based on the item that you need to procure. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me this morning. And without further ado, I would now like to hand you over to Ms. Hafzah Sooknanan.
Thank you, Pastora. Good day, everyone, and welcome to session 3. As you can see from the agenda, we have a packed learning session planned. Today, we are going to go into some stuff you already know, some stuff you think you know, and some stuff you don't know. Rest assured, by the end of today's session, we will all know more on the subject of identifying requirements and developing specifications. Let's dive in. First, let's talk about 2 terms that are commonly used interchangeably, but which have really different meanings and applications in the procurement process: requirements and specifications. Let's look at requirements. Procurement activities begin with the perception of a need. This relates to step 1 of the procurement cycle, which is about defining your procurement need. On the slide, you will see a definition of the term requirement. But what does it mean to identify requirements in procurement? Identifying requirements are done for each procurement activity, and this is about identifying your true need. How do you identify your true need? Well, you start by collecting information, and this is where your market research will come in. You look at product information, developments in the industry, and of course, the availability of supply and suppliers. Next, you identify appropriate options. Here, make sure the problem has been clearly defined. Only then can you look at what exists to solve the problem. After this, consider the present situation and forecasted future need. Is it either a new or a recurring need? At a high level, you can consider your contracting strategies. Example, a one-off buy via purchase order or possibly a framework agreement. Then look at delivery time constraints and obligations. In responding to the identified need, you would want to consider procurement lead time, supply chain issues, and also, at a high level, look at your procurement strategy options. For example, your lease or buy options. Finally, avoid over and under specifying. This is basically a caution, as you don't want to dump everything into your requirements because, again, this is a high-level activity. Now, just a couple of things to note here. The requisitioning department should use their best efforts to accurately describe the need. Secondly, at this stage, it is not about identifying the precise solution to the identified need. And last, the scope and effort put into each individual procurement activity should be based on the complexity of the requirements. When you have identified your requirements, you will have the answers to questions such as, what is this product or service for? Who will be the users of the product? What problem will this solution solve? What are the functions, attributes, constraints, preferences, and expectations of the good, work, or service? What do you want and how do you expect the supplier or contractor to provide it? As you can see, these questions look at the procurement activity from a high level. Therefore, lack of clarity at this stage can result in problems later on. Requirements and sustainability. How many procurement activities consider sustainability in the requirements phase? Consider this. Sustainable procurement can help create a healthier planet, one project at a time. So, it would make sense to include any sustainable factors into the requirements. After all, a requirement is something a product must do or a quality it must have. The items on the slide are just a few things for you to consider when identifying your requirements, and your market research would tell you whether such things are available. Now, I just want to touch on the first item only, and really, this is a challenge. The challenge being whether there is a real need for the item to be procured. Demand management, in this case, is about whether you need to procure the item at all, consider the potential environmental and social impacts, as well as alternative options in order to save resources and avoid unnecessary consumption. For example, end users, requisitioners, and the procurement professional need to consider whether laptops actually need to be replaced after the 3 or 5 year lifespan expires. And that is where you will include your sustainability in your requirements. So on this slide, we have the RACSI model. And this is a method for defining your business requirements. Let's be practical. The requisitioner ought not to go to the procurement unit and say, can you buy the ministry a car by the end of next month? As the requisitioner, you need to provide procurement with some basic information because as the end user, this information resides with you. So RACSI is presented in a step mode because it recommends the order in which you should define your needs at a high level. Tell me, how many of you jump to cost first when considering a purchase? Naturally, we all think about what we can afford or what was in the budget allocation before we think of any of the components identified in the model on this slide. So let's look at them. Regulatory. This covers any legal requirements or requirements of regulatory bodies. For example, licenses required for the importation of certain types of appliances or equipment or pharmaceuticals. Availability. This covers the continuity of supply of the goods and services when required and is based on factors such as capacity, financial stability, and risk. Quality. This is how fit for purpose the procured goods or services are. Service. This factor is associated with the way services are supplied, for example, flexibility, availability of support such as 24-hour help desk services, and cost. It is only after the other factors have been met that cost should be considered in aspects of both cost and price. For example, total cost of ownership considerations. And finally, innovation. It may be necessary to look for innovation, particularly in terms of improving the customer's experience. And an example of innovation would be the use of emerging technologies. To sum up, ROXI lays down a proper structure to identify your high-level business needs. This will help to reduce risks, especially for high-risk, high-value procurements, as you won't be trying to procure a complex, tailored software solution with the budget of an off-the-shelf program. So, when do we use this requirements information in our actual procurement? As mentioned earlier, that would be when you are defining your procurement need. And later on, the requirements will feed into the development of your specifications, which is part of preparing your solicitation documents. You can check out the comprehensive handbook on procurement, retention, and disposal of public property for more details on these steps of the procurement cycle. We will send a link in the chat. For the purpose of this training series, we have a simplified process flow to demonstrate how to move from identifying the requirements to developing the specifications, which form part of the solicitation documents, be it a request for quotation, an invitation to bid, or request for proposal. Now, the general guidelines on developing specifications has a more detailed process map for this cycle of specification, and we will send a link in the chat for you on that as well. Let's move on to specifications. As you know, the quality of a specification directly affects the outcome of any procurement activity. On the slide, you will see some descriptions of the term specification. What is meant here is that specifications facilitate the means of controlling quality. That is, it provides a degree of certainty in establishing the quality of the product so that it is fit for purpose and use. It also eliminates irrelevant characteristics. Let's look at a few examples that would help differentiate the two. Example 1. You need a new refrigerator. So, the user requirements will look at the available space the item has to fit into, what features are important to the persons using the fridge, what is the price range for procuring this item. These would be your requirements. The procurement unit turns your requirements into specifications that bidders understand as part of the solicitation documents. So when you say the refrigerator has to fit into a space that is 3 feet by 4 feet by 6 feet, procurement determines the maximum dimensions the refrigerator must conform to, considering, for example, whether it could be an exact fit or whether space is needed between the wall and the item. And this is done for each requirement. Next, we look at a second example. You are shopping for a new laptop. Prime user requirements might be weight, speed, and life of battery. So the user may want a laptop that can be used for 12 hours without being plugged in or require charging. When developing the specification, procurement would obviously look at the internal battery type as well as the battery life capacity. To fulfill the runtime requirement, procurement may also develop specifications around how long it takes the device to reach full charge. Now we look at the third example. Caribbean Airlines wants to procure a newer, lower emission airplane. So they want to fly 800 passengers from Trinidad direct to Tokyo, and they want to reduce emissions on this trip. These are the requirements. When the specifications are being developed, considerations such as the capacity per cabin, first class, business class, economy, etc. The airport's capacity would be considered as this would influence the overall size of the aircraft, the powering of the aircraft in terms of the number of engines, the horsepower of the engines, the type of fuel and fuel capacity. Finally, the acceptable emission rating to meet the reduced emission requirements would also be included in the specifications. As you can see, these specifications are based on the user's requirements. I hope the distinction between a requirement and a specification is clear, and that this information will be useful when planning and undertaking your procurements. Within the OPR's general guidelines on developing specifications, there are 3 types of documents that fall under the umbrella of specifications. As you see on this slide, for goods, you write a specifications document. For services, you write a terms of reference. For construction, you write a statement of works. Now, my colleague Devika will be going through these in detail with you later on in today's session so that you will get a good understanding of where, when, and how to use each of them. Within a typical procurement cycle, the specification document, once developed and approved, would then be incorporated into subsequent stages of the procurement cycle, thus forming part of other documents such as solicitation documents and contract documents. The significance of including specifications within the solicitation document is to ensure that bidding would not be restricted. You want to promote free and fair competition among suppliers. It should be the objective that all bidders, once compliant, would face an equally competitive bidding process. Additionally, since a specification document outlines the good, work, or service to be delivered under the contract, it is included as part of the contract instrument and is subsequently used for contract management purposes. Again, you can check out the comprehensive handbook for more details on the steps of the procurement cycle. So, we've talked about value for money in our previous sessions. Today, let's look at transparency and fairness. Here we have a scenario, and we would like you to give us your answer in the chat. And if you also want, you can briefly say why you gave that answer. So the scenario is, a regional health authority provides medical testing services to the public. Their equipment has passed end of life and needs replacing. Supplier L's sales and marketing team reaches out to the RHA with some suggestions to modernize and revise the RHA's standard old specifications. The RHA advertises an open tender for medical testing equipment, which includes Supplier L's recommendations for modernizing the RHA specifications. So the question is, should Supplier L be allowed or excluded from bidding? So please give us your answer in the chat. Okay, everyone, so we got a lot of answers in the chat. Some for allow, some for excluding. Good job, everyone. So let's analyze a little bit. Should Supplier L be allowed to bid? After all, they were just trying to help the RHA. Also, they are subject matter experts in the field, so their contribution would benefit the RHA's solicitation documents. And the RHA would have to spend less time doing market research and analysis. So, sounds like a good case for allowing them. Should they be excluded? Consider, did they have an unfair advantage? Knowing about the upcoming procurement activity before other suppliers. Could they have been privy to information not provided in a solicitation document? Did their suggestions influence the solicitation documents? Could their input have created lockout specifications? What's the answer? Well, scenarios such as this one are decided on the specific facts of the case, and we deliberately didn't give too many facts. Therefore, both answers have the potential to be correct. So, we are dealing with operational planning, and we have mentioned transaction cost a couple of times. And as you know, this refers to, among other things, the time spent on undertaking a procurement activity. We would also have mentioned the level of effort and how this should be commensurate with what you are procuring. Consider having to procure, say, 2 SUVs for a small organization versus 200 motor vehicles for the police service. Specifications are not a one-size-fits-all. Remember, the complexity of the specification document should be based on the type of procurement and the specific solicitation document being prepared by the procuring entity. So you can refer to the general guidelines on procurement methods and procedures for a wide range of procurement methods that may be adopted for the procurement of goods, works, or services, and we will send a link in the chat. But these are the things that influence whether your specifications are simple or complex. A specification can take 3 forms, sometimes referred to as the types of specifications. Let's take a look at each of these. Essentially, functional specifications focus on the capabilities, appearance, and interactions that you, the buyer, want from the good, work, or service. Here are some examples of functional specifications for each good, a work, or a service. As you can see, these functional specifications will allow suppliers to provide solutions based on the functionalities the buyer identifies. To get the best results from your solicitation, remember to use accepted standard, industry, or commercial technology to communicate the functions that would meet the identified need. Performance specifications. These are referred to as outcome specifications, and they describe the deliverables in terms of the desired operational characteristics. This is achieved by defining the task or desired performance results by focusing on what is to be achieved. Performance specifications do not describe the method of achieving the desired results, and this enables suppliers to provide solutions based on performance requirements. Here are some examples of performance specifications for goods, works, and services. If you recall the last step on the ROXY model, innovation, functional and performance specifications are the way to go if you want to allow your supplier to provide you with an innovative solution. That being said, using both functional and performance specifications may seem like an attractive option, but depending on your procurement strategy, would not be suitable in some cases. Take the example of a printer. Consider how would you evaluate bids for a desktop printer versus bids received for a multifunction printer copier. Both would meet your performance and functional specifications, but evaluating would be an issue. Last is technical or conformance specification. This form of specification is not the one to use if you want your suppliers to be innovative. Care should be taken not to make technical specifications too restrictive or base them on detailed product specifications of a particular supplier, brand, or model, since this directly contradicts Section 9(5) of the Act. Here are some examples of technical specifications. As you can see, these specifications are written in a prescriptive manner that would easily allow for comparing apples with apples when evaluating bids. So here is the how-to for developing your specifications. Number 1, don't write specifications that are biased in any aspect towards any particular supplier. You don't want to limit competition and risk value for money not being achieved. Additionally, such bias directly contravenes Section 59(5) of the Act. Number 2, write your specifications using terminology that is commercially used among relevant suppliers, or you risk potential suppliers not responding, failing to respond fully, or including a premium in their prices to cover the risk of uncertainty in their interpretation of your specifications. Number 3, use the appropriate form of specification. Remember, the less you specify, the more varied the options you will get in the bids. Number 4, your market research would have given you information on what is usually offered. Consider this. Do the suppliers of photocopying machines also sell copy paper? No. So don't specify such, as this may result in suppliers deciding not to submit a bid, or may result in a price premium to cover providing something the supplier is unfamiliar with. Number 5, the selection of or combination of the various forms of specifications must satisfy your need, whether technical, functional, or performance. Remember, the more you know about what you want informs the form of specification to be used. Number 6, and this point is about using cross-functional teams. Inputs from commercial and technical experts are needed to ensure the requirements are expressed in a manner to which relevant suppliers may fully respond. Number 7, suppliers can propose wide and varied options when responding to under-specified specifications. This would make it very difficult to evaluate, and again, you need to be mindful of Section 32(2) of the Act. Number 8, what this means is that there is a risk that no one supplier may be able to meet all the requirements. On the other hand, it can also promote bias towards a particular supplier. Again, this contravenes Section 59(5) of the Act. And last, number 9, remember, the aim is to achieve the objects of the Act by optimizing the balance between cost and fitness for purpose. And those are the factors that you should consider when developing your specifications. So let's look at the use of brand names in specifications. A brand name should not be used in a specification. This statement should be considered as a general rule. The reason for deviating from this general rule is that the procuring entity is unable to describe sufficiently the quality and characteristics of what they're looking to procure. Let me repeat that. The reason for deviating from the general rule is that the procuring entity is unable to describe sufficiently the quality and characteristics of what they are looking to procure. Using brand names in specifications is not to be done as a shortcut where needs or requirements have not been identified, where market research has not been conducted, to circumvent a competitive bidding process, or where the end user has a preference for a particular brand. On the slide, some guidance is provided in the event that a brand name has to be used and how to do so in a specification document. First, after identifying the brand name, insert the words or equivalent. This would allow suppliers of products meeting similar functional, performance, or technical standards to bid. The or equivalent product must be functionally equivalent to the brand name product, but not necessarily the same in every detail. To help you, you may include a checklist for suppliers to identify how their product meets or could be modified to meet your specifications. In line with this is that specifications should clearly invite suppliers and contractors of equivalent products. Third, let's say you want to procure a 4x4 double cab pickup truck. You may include multiple similar brands to focus suppliers on what you are looking to procure. For example, Nissan Navara, Toyota Hilux, Mitsubishi Spotaro, or Ford F-150. Next, brand names should never be used without also specifying essential minimum requirements. It is therefore inappropriate to request bids for a 14-nut firewall hardware model 40F and state no other minimum requirements. Finally, using brand names requires significant justification. For example, maintenance, compatibility of parts, interoperability. To summarize, using a brand name specification can be used in complex situations to mitigate risk and ensure that suppliers understand your requirements. However, the public body must be mindful that if used inappropriately to circumvent proper procurement procedures, they are opening up themselves to challenge proceedings being brought against them. So the quality of the specification document is key to getting what you want. On this slide, we have a few pointers on what you don't want to put into your specification document. And the reason for this list is that including these items would add no value to your procurement activity. In fact, it may even prevent you from receiving eligible responsive bids or achieving value for money. So remember, specifications should not include conditions of tender, conditions of contract, bias favoring a supplier, questionnaires used by tenderers to submit offers, aspects which may lead to discrimination either directly or indirectly to particular suppliers, overspecified requirements. So to summarize, when developing your specification document, remember to be clear, be specific, be accurate. Focus on the outcome. That is what you want the product or service to achieve. Cover all requirements as this will reduce questions for suppliers and identify the essential versus the desirable components. Well, this takes me to the end of my part of today's session. I now hand you over to Devika Singh.
Thank you, Hafzah, and good morning, everyone. So just to recap, as my colleague Hafzah would have mentioned, there are 3 types of documents that can be used in developing your specifications. So for goods, specification type documents are prepared. For terms of reference, we use terms of reference are used for the procurement of services, and the statement of works is used for construction services. Now remember, when defining your specification or your terms of reference or your statement of works, you would have used information gathered during the market research stage, where you would have utilized various techniques and sources, like, just to recap again, like your internet research, requests for information. You would have probably gotten information from journals and catalogs in order to know what is actually available in the market. And I'm sure most of you would have recalled, we would have covered this topic in our last session when we discussed the market research report. Now, looking at this slide, this shows us the difference between specifications and terms of reference. Now, specifications, as we would have mentioned, are generally used in a case for the procurement of goods, whereas terms of reference are generally used when procuring services. So we just take a look at a brief description of both terms. Specification is a term which provides a technical description or the physical characteristics of the good to be procured. So, for example, in the procurement of a vehicle, you may have minimum petrol tank size or engine size in cubic centimeters. And for terms of reference, on the other hand, this outlines the vision, the objectives, the scope of services, and deliverables. It may also outline the roles and responsibilities of your stakeholders, the resources required. You may want to include as well the work breakdown structure. So what we'll do in the next few slides, we will briefly go through the information which would be included in both the specification type document as well as your terms of reference type. So we look at the terms of reference type documentation first, and the components, and in developing your terms of reference, a simple and generic description of the service is required for the title, and this is a really good starting point. So, for example, a good title for might be the provision of security services for company X. Secondly, in your terms of reference, a table of contents will make it easy for the supplier to follow and understand your specification document. Next, background information in your terms of reference, and this can usually assist the potential suppliers in understanding the requirements in the context of the entity's needs, as well as ensuring that the service offered is fit for purpose for the procuring entity. Now, you may also want to include specific constraints and limitations in your terms of reference. And an example of this may be physical space available for installing a particular piece of equipment, or maybe compatibility with an existing equipment or system. Another item in your terms of reference would be requirements, and the amount of detail provided in your terms of reference, as I know my colleague Hafzah would have mentioned, should reflect the complexity of the requirements. So in defining your requirements, be sure to utilize the 3 types of specification, which we would have mentioned before, or you can use it in combination, which would have been functional, performance, or technical specification. Next, you may want to include the timing and delivery to the end user for the service, and it should be specifically mentioned and included as an evaluation criterion. Now, if time is of the essence, this should be clearly stated and bidders made aware that the inability to deliver within the required time frame could lead to disqualification of their bid. Another item in your terms of reference document would be quality. An example of quality requirements may include stating that maybe ISO quality standards will be accepted, Then we could look at testing. And this is where, for some services, testing may be required by the supplier or third party. For example, testing of a software system to see if it is fit for purpose. And specifying the test includes nominating the criteria for passing or failing those tests, as well as the implications for failing. So we would have just outlined the components of a terms of reference document. Now we will look at a simple specification type document and what it may consist of. So only a few components may be required in this document, depending on the type of procurement and the solicitation document being prepared by the procuring entity, which would include things like title, introduction, scope, and background information, all of which we would have already explained in our previous slide. Now, however, for a complex type specification, more detailed information may be required. And therefore, you can use the components we mentioned in the terms of reference to develop your specification for a complex type procurement. So now we look at the last specification type document, which is the statement of works. And this includes design or drawings, bill of quantities, also known as scope of services, and technical specifications, which should describe the works in sufficient detail to identify the location, nature, and any complexities involved. Now, the term works generally includes all types of civil, mechanical, electrical, or other engineering services, as well as the supply of construction materials and equipment. So just to clarify, the statement of works should not be confused with a scope of works, as the statement of works includes a part for the scope of works. The statement of works is a very comprehensive legal document that describes the objectives and goals of a project, whereas the scope of work specifies the specific procedure to accomplish these goals. Now, the following table gives a listing of what information should be included in your statement of works for a typical works project. However, we would have discussed most of these items in our previous slides when discussing specifications and terms of reference. So in the next few slides, we will only touch on the highlighted items that are checked off, which would be the general information, supplier requisites, technical, operational, and organizational environment, reporting requirements, contractor obligations, and special requirements, as we believe that maybe you might require more clarification on these items to assist you in developing your statements of works. So let us briefly take a look at these items. So general information in your statement of works would include the location of the site, legal status, and site ownership. You may also want to indicate whether the designs are being provided and if the designs have been registered, or if a right of way is needed to gain access to the location. And you'd also want to clarify who is responsible for what in that respect. Next, supplier requisites in your statement of works, and this states the experience required for the project, which would include the number of similar works undertaken within a reasonable number of years and client references. The statement of works should also indicate the function and qualifications required by each key personnel, financial capabilities, minimum number and characteristics of the equipment needed to undertake the works, as well as if there are any construction methods and approaches required. So what does technical, operational, and organizational environment mean in your statement of works? And this basically provides details on, again, the technical, organizational, operational environment in which the work will be completed. It is more significant in work where technical capability issues may arise. And in some cases, it is important to describe in this section how the work will fit within other initiatives and who will be ultimately the end user of the requirements. Now, reporting requirements, this describes any performance or status reporting requirements which will be expected of the contractor during the life of the contract. And it includes the format, frequency, maybe number of copies, and specific content requirements, right? Contractors' obligation. This may include things like keeping all documents and proprietary information confidential, meeting of all tasks, deliverables, and milestones, as well as maybe returning all materials belonging to the procuring entity upon completion of the contract. And lastly, in your statement of works, you may want to include special requirements, and this will indicate if there will be any requirements for special licenses, maybe information on patents, permits, bonds, that may be required by either party. So, with that being said, we've come to the section where I will pass you over to Ms. Tamara Roy.
Thank you so much, Devika. So at this time, we will be taking a 10-minute break where we will try to put you into groups and prepare you for the case study and assignment, which will come up after the break. So we will be putting a timer on the screen, and we will see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, participants. We do hope that you would have noted the important information in the video that we just showed so that you'll be able to participate effectively. I will now invite Devika Singh to continue on with the presentation, this time with the case study and assignment.
Thank you, Tamara, and welcome back, everyone. So now that we've completed our teaching session for today, we are going to move on to the section of today's session, which will require your participation. And it will give you the opportunity to practice the basics of what you have learned today. So let us take a look at the case study. And the case study would have been emailed to you earlier on this morning, as well as at the beginning of our first training session. So we ask that you kindly access it for this section of today's session. Now, the assignment based on a case study for today would require you to, one, develop requirements for one item from the outfitting project in the case study and indicate the type of specification you will be drafting. So that is whether it will be functional, performance, or technical, and provide your justification for your choice of specification. Fairly simple exercise, right? So we're going to assign each group an item for which they will be conducting the assignment on. So I will just, it was shared in the chat moments ago, so I'll just read it out for everyone. So groups 1, 7, 13, and 19 will be developing requirements for office furniture. Groups 2, 8, 14, and 20 will be developing requirements for computer hardware and peripherals. Groups 3, 9, and 15, telephone will be your item. For groups 4, 10, and 16, requirements will be developed for data. Groups 5, 11, and 17, audiovisual equipment will be your item. And groups 6, 12, and 18, small appliances will be your item. Right? So now we'll go ahead and split you up into breakout rooms where you'll be given 30 minutes to complete this assignment. We'll be popping into each group just to check on you all to make sure everything is going well. And at the end of the 30 minutes, you'll return to the main room where we will then ask one member from each group to present your answer for discussion. So be sure to appoint your representative to provide your group's response. So we're okay, and we'll be breaking you all up into groups in now.
Is also one that it varies, depends on what you're looking for. And if there is only one university or training organization that is putting forward that training, the best bet is to negotiate if you're sending 2 and 3 persons to negotiate bulk discounts and so on, but they are the ones that are providing the training. If you can get the same training at a better price in different organizations, for example, I'll give you an example that you have 2 providers of training in Trinidad for mediation training. Almost certainly the price is probably almost the same. And how do you decide which one you go to? Again, you'll probably look at when they are putting up the training sessions and whether or not the people you want to participate is available for those sessions and so on. Again, you have to consider all the different angles in terms of deciding for the training and whether or not those training institutions are also have accredited programs that you could benefit from the accreditations and so on. A lot of times training is looked at as opportunistic. You need to have a proper training plan coming out of your performance management systems. And you have to be looking at what gaps are you trying to fill. A lot of times some people would just look at the newspapers and see a training program and say, that looked like a nice training program, I want to go on it. Without proper training, without proper, research is not part of your performance development schedule, is not part of your training strategy. And those are things that what we require and recommend is that you do a proper training plan with your HR department that includes the sourcing of the training so you get the best training with the best value for money proposition. Again, it goes back to your annual procurement plan.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Lalchan, Pastora, and Rhonda for taking us through the Q&A session. So since there are no further questions at this time, on behalf of the team here at the OPR, we wish to thank you for your time and engaging feedback. We do hope the information shared will be put to use as we move forward towards full proclamation. As we close off, we welcome your feedback in a short survey. This will now be shared in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. You can submit any further questions for feedback to us at feedback@opr.org.tt. Thank you very much and do enjoy the rest of your day.